In today's video, I'm going to go over every single cut and removed character spanning across the series' history. The definition of cut for the context of this video is as follows: characters that can only be found internally, or characters that are not present in the final retail product of their game, have internal information that would suggest they were intended to be playable at some point, but are only NPCs or as enemies, and also name strings, as in character names that are just that, without any context. They're just in the game, almost as if the devs had an idea of what these characters could be, but left them on the cutting room floor extremely early in development. I will drop some honorable mentions because if I don't, the comments will probably call me out anyway, which means I will distinguish these characters as honorable mentions if they are present in the game but are relegated to NPC or enemy character status, and also genuinely cut characters that have never seen the light of day. Also, don't be surprised if I forgot to mention some pretty obscure character entry. I may just have this video is as conclusive as it can be, but you never know, I might have forgotten somebody. So we're going to be starting with Fire Emblem 1 all the way to Fire Emblem Three Houses. Fire Emblem, Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. Saber, Wyler, and King Grust. Saber is quite an interesting first entry. He has two IDs internally, one as an enemy and one as an ally. On top of that, he was apparently coded to be recruited by Ogma. He has no base stats, but has growths identical to Elise and Goto, two endgame playable characters. Saber's portrait is that of Michaelis. Funny enough, he did have an ending. He embarked on a journey that took him from land to land in pursuit of truth. While we could joke about Saber getting his dues in FE2, it should be noted that Saber and Saber are quite different. King Grust also has a character entry at 0xBB. While he was renamed to Ludwig in Shadow Dragon, he went unused in FE1, and given his slot proximity to other enemy characters, it points to the possibility that he might have been intended to be an enemy once. Honorable mention goes to Wyler. Wyler only appears on Fire Emblem 1's battle test, which is only here for display purposes. Referring back to my previous video about hidden codes in Fire Emblem, the sound test can be accessed after any chapter by pressing up, down, left, right, up, and then A after selecting not to continue after saving. Pushing start on the sound test gets you into the battle test, which cycles through animations, with Wyler being the first enemy. Fire Emblem Gaiden. Character ID 0x18 has a strange entry. The level 5 paladin goes by the name Forsyth, and he uses Alm's portrait. He interestingly has a unique set of stats. There is a near carbon copy of Clive at character ID 0x0b. He joins as a level 6 cavalier like Clive as well, but instead of Clive's 1 res, this one has 0 res. Besides these notable ones, there is a ton of unused character labels, namely for enemy units. Masena gets an honorable mention, since while he's treated as an NPC, he was coded as an enemy instead, meaning it's possible he could have fought Alm at some point. Other interesting name entries are Hannibal, who used Slade's portrait, and Juno, whose name string is found among other playable characters. Mystery of the Emblem. Mystery of the Emblem is kind of a weird case. For those uninitiated, FE3 is separated into two books, Book 1 and Book 2. Book 1 is a very truncated version of FE1, which cuts a noticeable part of the cast to make room for Book 2's characters and for the sake of memory. Displayed on screen are the characters who did not make the cut, but their data is actually still in the game. Otherwise, there aren't any really interesting unique name strings or character slots found in the game as far as I know. Thracia 776. Funny enough, we are skipping FE4 because FE4 has no unused characters in it. There are updated FE5 styled portraits that were made for several Generation 2 Fire Emblem 4 characters. Arthur, Daisy, Asalo, Jean, and Hermina might have had a role to play in the game at some point. Rilke, Jabal, Schuper, Kant, Mannheim, and Orvis were all likely going to be bosses that went unused. They all use generic portraits found elsewhere in the final game. There's also Gunter the Bishop. Gunter is the most interesting case here because everything points to him being intended to be a playable unit, as opposed to an enemy or NPC. He is all but stated to be Asbel's father, as it's stated in his ending that he was the Bishop of Frest. Gunter has both an escape and death quote, the former being reserved reserved for playable characters only. He does reuse Cohen's portrait, but maybe it was a placeholder. And hilariously, he has a 10% movement growth for some reason. Honorable mentions go to Ishtar. While in this game she makes a few cameos as an NPC, alongside Trevant and Arian, who also have stats in the game but aren't seen, there's unused dialogue and data pointing out she would have appeared as a reinforcement boss in Chapter 19, wielding her signature tome Mjolnir, which also happens to go unused in this game. Binding Blade. Besides a bunch of unused generic portraits in FE6, William was intended to be a paladin boss at some point in the game. He has an A rank in lances, but otherwise was pretty unremarkable. They never gave him a character description either. He also shares a portrait with Robarts. Blazing Sword. There are a decent number of characters unused in the game by name alone. They have no character data or portraits. They are listed here by virtue of their text strings found internally. They are Nadine, located between Isadora and Legault, Santals, located between Ubons and Nurgle, Bruno, between Ursula and Paul, Bogan, after Brendan, Efta, located after Bogan but before Denning, Alexis, located after Igor, Linus's Grunt, and Bodwin, located after Alexis. Igreen is also in this camp, located between Uther and Dart. She's mentioned as Hawkeye's daughter in his support with Louise. Sacred Stones. Fun fact about Sacred Stones, there was actually a prototype of FE8 made May 2004, several months before the final retail version of the game dropped in October of that year. In this prototype version, which you can actually patch, you could actually play through the beta version. The contents of this beta FE8 and actually the follow-up beta FE8, there was actually 2 prototypes before the game released, could honestly be its own video. Anyway, Jude and Nate are the notable names here. Nate was a Wyvern rider featured in the prototype, and Jude was one of the 7 Imperial generals. In Chapter 8 of the prototype version, he introduces himself as Jude Rubert, sent to capture Erica. He also was known as the Obsidian. The Obsidian was the moniker given to Dusel in the final version. The beta version also has a few unused names. According to the wiki, they were Demi, Maeve, Lo, and Militia. Finally, there was a bandit, literally named Bandit. His portrait appears in Chapter 5, but his internal stats and characteristics, like a Thunder affinity, which is reserved for playable characters or enemies with support boosts through their own close allies, isn't used. Instead, it's just a generic brigand. There is another bandit named Bandit, located just under him in the character data, with an unused portrait as well. Path of Radiance. Path of Radiance is an interesting game for this list because there are a lot of honorable mentions. Grail, Sephirin, Sigrun, Cainigus, and Zelgius are all NPCs, but each have various levels of completeness internally that would suggest that maybe at one point they were meant to be playable in some capacity, like in trial maps or something. Grail has a non-prologue version of himself where his stats are very high, and due to his hero class can be given Occult and learn Aether through hacking, although the animation plays a little differently than Ike's. He was also given bond supports with Ike and Titania, meaning that Grail would get passive boosts just for being near them. The other ones have a mix of base stats, growths, and skills, at varying levels of completeness, but no real evidence to back that they were ever intended to be playable. Just saying it here so the comments don't have to mention it. Neolucci and Leanne are quite similar to the above-mentioned characters, except that these two have escape and death quotes. Like Gunter in Thracia 776, this could be used as evidence to suggest that they had playable roles in the plot at one point. Nonetheless, they still weren't completely finished, as neither of them have any skills. Heather. Not to be confused with FE10's Heather, this Heather was actually a sword cavalier with stats of her own. The only art asset she has is that she uses the Bagnian crest for her portrait, and her name entry was wiped clean from the localization. All of her base stats and growths are that of Tanith's Pegasus Knight reinforcements. If you've ever browsed unused content in Path of Radiance on the wiki or on Serenae's Forest, you may have heard the name Melty. They have the exact same bases and growths as Heather, but as a Pegasus Knight, and these are actually used by Tanith's reinforcements, meaning that this ID is called when Tanith uses her skill to get Pegasus Knights on the field. So technically, this is a character slot that is used in the game. Here are some cut name entries that were removed from the localization. The ones of note here are Black Sanaki, listed before regular Sanaki. No one knows what Black Sanaki was supposed to mean, but on the topic of her, there is an actual in-game model of her older self. Not that those two are related in any way. Ashura and Yune have entries but are both actually seen in Radiant Dawn. Monica, whose entry is listed between Largo and Astrid, 2 playable characters, and Glyce, who is listed between late-game bosses. Radiant Dawn. Honorable mention goes to Zelgius, aka the Black Knight. While Zelgius is of course present in the game, all of his fights are scripted and you never actually fight or see him as Zelgius in any map. That said, he has a unique martial class that can use swords and lances. Following the trend of unused name strings, Radiant Dawn has the following unused names. Dent, located between Numida and Grandfather. Tabitha, listed between Nico and Alder. Nabi, listed after Alder. Yoromi, listed after Nabi but before Ferrer, which is suspected to be an unused generic army name, and Gritz, listed between Ameda and Leiron. Gritz is definitely the interesting name entry here, since this entry is between 2 majorly plot-relevant characters. New Mystery of the Emblem. While there's nothing noteworthy for Shadow Dragon, New Mystery has an interesting case to make for Goto. While Goto was never playable in Mystery of the Emblem, and while this game stays faithful to that end by giving Goto the exact same role as an NPC, he has unique stats internally which of course never be put to use, as Goto is literally the only character that remains unplayable in FE12, which is in contrast to the rest of the cut cast and the broadcast Satellaview Fire Emblem gang. It makes one wonder if the devs at one point considered to have Goto playable with these stats, but alas, that is not the case. Awakening. This game has several unused character names that can be found in the game's data. As per the cutting room floor, an entry for Andrea is located with the spot pass characters. An entry for Leopold exists between Cordelia and Noe's entries. An entry for Bella exists between Minerva and Valadar's entries. And an entry for Tracy exists between Henry and Lucina's entries. Fates. Here's a weird one. There is character data for a male generic Valite villager that can be captured. His ID is 0x82. He has growth rates and uses the hooded Sumeragi portrait from chapter 5 instead of the actual Valite villager portrait. Not sure what happened there. I'm definitely not saying that the game at one point had a capturable Valite in mind, but it is funny to think about. Nicole and Candace are very unique cases as a whole. Even though they're both capturable bosses in the final game, not only do they have critical cut-ins, which are usually saved for playable units and major bosses, but also have empty directories located among the characters who can only support with Corrin, suggesting that it's possible these 2 in particular might have had a bigger role to play at some point, especially with Nicol, since he also has an unused voice line.
I fear death above all things.
Finally, a released piece of Fates' original script, the one IS commissioned to Kibayashi, revealed Scarlet originally had an ally/partner called Mateus, who was cut from the game altogether, while Intelligent Systems tweaked and inserted the original story into the game. Echoes. Fernand and Berkut are interesting characters to go over. While Fernand is playable in DLC, and Berkut is an enemy only, they both have voice files as if they were intended to be playable at some point in development. They have unique battle lines, eating lines, level up lines, death and retreat lines, and even post-battle/mourning quotes, even both being voiced in Japanese and English. This could point out that they may have been intended to be recruitable at one point, but ultimately the idea was scrapped.
Stop fooling about. Think, would you? Will you heal already? You must take more care. Perhaps you'll get it next time. You could set a better example. Keep doing that. Don't mistake me for those other muscle-bound dullards. Perhaps I underestimated them. Carry on without me. I'll find a place to recover.
Finally, since Berkut replaced Shizes, the Gold Knight in the original Gaiden that appears when Berkut first appears as an enemy in Echoes, Shizes himself is still actually in the game's data with his original base stats and everything. He simply goes unused. Three Houses. While I have mentioned many of these characters in my cutting room floor video, there's also some new additions here worth noting.
Geralt is fairly complete for the most part, but he has no black/dark magic on his spell list, and is the only one of the 3 who has a complete second set of unused battle clips, which sound pretty dangerous in a sense.
The Blade Breaker's wrath. Make your peace. I see your weakness.
He also has some quotes meant to be used during a tea party as well.
Didn't peg me as a tea drinker, did you? Very nice.
Rhea, on the other hand, is by far the most complete character of the three, and her Tea Party data was even half finished for many months until the version 1.2.0 update. She's coded to change her appearance after the time skip to wear Saint Sero's clothes like in Crimson Flower's late game, though that only affects her 3D model as a playable unit.
As you wish. May the goddess protect me. Sweet goddess. Disappointing. I have ascended. I must be strong. I must. My full power is realized. I understand this better. Let us join you. We will lend a hand. At once, lend me your strength.
Lastly, Sothis has no personal skill, spell lists, Tea Party data, nor boons or banes, but is fully playable otherwise. She's fittingly coded to have a major crest of flames, and her class icon is the same one added next to a save file after beating a route or playing her New Game Plus. Take a listen to her battle quotes.
Prepare yourself! Revenge, it lives! Atone at once! I shall cut through!
Near the character data where minor members of those who slither in the dark are stored, there is code for one unseen member called Cleobulus, who uses a generic mage portrait. We now know who Cleobulus actually is thanks to Three Hopes, but in Three Houses he goes entirely unused. Count Galatea, Ingrid's father, is mentioned in Byleth and Ingrid's B support where she reads a letter from him out loud, but he actually also has a character slot that goes unused. There is also the odd Wave 3 DLC girl who I have mentioned a few times now, but I'll just quote TCRF on this one. The Wave 3 DLC, version 1.1.0, added a new character which was never finalized. Checking the game's data reveals said character is a 17-year-old girl with the Commoner class. Her birthday is January 1st. Her base stats and growths are exactly the same as Ferdinand's, and she's set to call out voice clips absent in the game. Curiously, some of her data changed during updates. In version 1.1.0, she was affiliated with the Adrestian Empire and had a minor crest of Keyhole. In version 1.2.0, however, her affiliation changed to the Church of Seros and her crest changed into a major crest of flames. Besides these, there is a huge amount of name strings that go unused, located after character names but before generic monastery NPCs and cutscene characters. They are Fedor, Feld, Linnell, Kush, Beltia, Dora, Pennet, Drieg, Felvin, Al, Silale, Mary, Maureen, Grindel, Lowe, Uriel, Schumacher, Rochelle, Susanna, Helda, Ray, Sebastian, Carly, Hamburg, Matthew, Gil, Alfred, Kaya, Charles, and General. And we are now finished with the list. And I learned a lot about weird things like the betas for Sacred Stones or the weird animation for Greel. I found the name strings really interesting because I never really put much stock into characters that are just names and literally nothing else. It makes you kind of wonder what those were for, especially for the games that had a lot of them. Like, I think it's cool that Saber from FE1, if he was actually a character that ended up being real, then he would have had a potential FE3 version, well, a definite FE11 version, an FE12 version, and depending on how cool he was, maybe he would be in Heroes or something. So it's kind of cool to imagine these what if scenarios. Big shout out to all of TCRF, the cutting room floor as well, all of the writers that did everything, because a lot of my information came from there, as well as various Discord servers that I asked questions in. A lot of the things I pulled were directly from their page, so if you want to look at other unused content from the Fire Emblem series, check it out. If you did enjoy this video, please leave a like. Comment down below the most surprising entry to you. Like, I'd be interested to know what you guys think of this. Big thank you to everyone who is continuing to subscribe and continuing to watch. The channel is less than 800 subscribers away from 99,000, which is like ridiculous. I've been like keeping track every single day. Like, the channel's very, it's like so unbelievably close to 100,000, so it would mean quite a bit. With that all being said, have a good rest of your week, and I'll see you in the next one. Deuces.